everyone. Hello, Charlie. Thank you for being here.
Hey,
So,
Sonia.
everyone, we have the amazing Charlie Winn here, and he's going to be telling us all about how he works through a leadership system for rapid growth businesses. And I am very excited to share what he does because what he does is amazing. And so, first, I'd just love to introduce you to Charlie. So, ladies and gentlemen, meet Charlie Winn, who is a leadership coach who specializes in developing experienced and aspiring leaders in business so they have the tools to inspire and develop those around them. Charlie is driven to make a difference, influencing people to understand that leadership is just as much about relationships and structure within your context as it is about achieving. This is best done by creating and sustaining a balance between the person, the business, the profit, and the planet in the wider system the founder or owner exists in. Charlie has led in many different spaces and using a variety of ways, including business owner, global director with a team of 40 plus, industry board member, program manager, head coach of a rugby club, co-coach of a rugby team club president, business coach, leadership team coach, TDS certified, mentor, agile coach, and consultant. Charlie's dream client is a business between 40 to 100 employees who are rapidly growing and often have a significant event that has occurred or is about to occur, such as they've bought another business or there's a major restructure in their company. Charlie comes in and he navigates the leaders through these changes, looking at the capabilities of the individuals and the structures of how the leaders collaborate and connect. So I'm very interested to hear what Charlie is going to tell us all about today. So, Charlie, take it away.
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you. That's really appreciate the introduction. So I suppose the conversation we've had before and just trying to understand what would be great for you and your audience to kind of hear a little bit more about. There's a story that I thought about one of my clients, which I've been working with for a few years, and they're about 40 employees at the moment. They were a little larger actually. They were a little larger when they bought another business. They're in the construction space, in the construction industry. And there's two owners that then bought this other business. Now, what kind of then occurred was that they pretty much smashed the two businesses together, as in like just assumed that necessarily when we bought the two sets of people together, that everything would just carry on almost. Now, what they then worked out, which is why they then first reached out to me, was that the way that some people expected to ultimately behave on one side of the business was very different to the way that the business that they owned and been operating successfully. Now that they needed this other business, and they needed the clients associated with them and the revenue associated with them, but the people were creating a lot of drama internally. So where we started was to become clearer on what the new owners' values and their vision was. And it had changed slightly from when they originally decided to buy the business as they learnt more about what they wanted and didn't want. So we did a fair bit of work initially in that space, and then we became clear that really the culture that they wanted to create, which they hadn't really given as much thought about, really was slightly different to either businesses that they currently had. Now it was closer to the one that they had owned and built themselves, but it wasn't exactly the same. It was to be more mature and more understanding about what their clients needed. But what they knew particularly was that the new business the business that bought, they really didn't like the way that a lot of those people behaved. So we spent time there and we went through and we looked at each person and we looked also at the structures of how the business was or wasn't working. And we made some significant, or they made some significant decisions to move on certain quite key individuals. And in fact, some of those decisions meant they lost business. They lost certain key clients. But they made those decisions decisively, as in they were aware that's likely to occur and they were prepared to take that risk so that the culture of the business necessarily was created in the spaces that they wanted. because they knew that if they didn't take these decisions, that more drama, more clients in longer term would leave. So they made these decisions, and then also upskill themselves to be really clear on what um, how to kind of move forward through these challenges, which has been having more effective, difficult conversations, of calling out the elephant in the room, of holding people to account and becoming clear on what their values were. So, and now they're at a point where they're now growing and growing up into other states. There's still a bit of a challenge in that old business, as they still need to move on some more people, but ultimately they're in a much better space and they're a lot more clear on who they want to be and who they want their business to be. So I thought I'd just take you through that story, where necessarily we sometimes need to go through a bit of pain to be able to get to the point where a business then is ready to start to fly, because that's if we then continue to allow for things to continue where we've got this often a disconnect between different parts of the business or misalignment, is that often we then see that white anting or backstabbing, or necessarily people not working effectively together. So I thought I'd just tell that story as a start, and hopefully that gives you a bit of context of a possible way that I can come in and assist organizations. But I thought I'd just show you a couple of things, that's all right, Sonia.
Please, yeah.
Necessarily to reflect a bit more of the story and kind of how I work. So I'm just going to share that screen. So I'll just start. I thought it's often useful to talk about what leadership is really briefly, because people all have their own perspectives on it based on their experience, or maybe some of the people that have significantly influenced themselves in their lives. So I see leadership as wanting to create our world, whatever world that is that we're leading, whether it's a rugby club, as you mentioned, the rugby, or a business, or necessarily a space within a business or a family. But we want to be able to create it. We want to be able to be proactive and ensure that we are being deliberate about what we're doing, and we should know what this world is that we're trying to do. So once we kind of be clear on that, we can then start to say we need to be proactive. We need to create. We want to be reducing our reactivity to stuff that happens and try to get in front of stuff. But we need to do it with other people. Of course, it might sound almost silly, but ultimately that's the key around leadership, is that we're doing it with other people. We need to do it together. And ultimately, we need to do it every day, which can be a real challenge. Um, and that's where sometimes if you're not clear on things like your own personal values or your vision or your purpose, then that's where it becomes difficult, because you sometimes find yourself making inconsistent decisions or prioritizing certain things differently each day. And that's where things can become hard and become challenging, because of ultimately being a little inauthentic, not deliberately, but we're probably being inauthentic and necessarily how we're leading. So that's why I like to start there. Now, I wouldn't mind taking you through a little bit of the, the leadership system for rapid growth businesses. So what we know is that rapid growth businesses, they are often seeing few things happen. There's often employee frustration or internal drama, as I kind of call it, and that's usually the thing that kind of comes up first. So when I was talking about the story earlier about that the business that's in the construction industry, is that there was this internal drama between the two sides. Literal stand-up shouting matches occurring, and not just one, multiples of them. Now, we also then started to see clients start to complain or talk about inconsistencies in the way they're being dealt with, or people not getting back to people, and therefore they're not prioritizing them. So we're seeing that as well. And and even though they'd brought those two businesses together, the two revenues didn't eventually, they started to reduce. And because there's so much focus on the internal drama or trying to find or what's kind of going on with those disgruntled clients, is the profit margins start to drop. So we kind of see all that can kind of happen, and that happened in that story, and it can happen quite often in businesses, particularly when there's been some event. And it could be even as if something like AI comes along. So we might need to change business models. Well, what does that mean? So therefore, some people might want to be embracing AI, some people might not want to. So we can get this misalignment, and then can we can see things occur within businesses. So how do I look at this? Uh, I often start with leadership capability, and which sounds logical, but ultimately I also start with self. So I'll always start in understanding where, if it's the business owner or the key or the CEO, where are they at? How are they going? Because ultimately, if they can't lead themselves, they are going to be ineffective at leading others and definitely leading the business themselves. So we start there, but we know ultimately that the key leaders need to be able to lead others, but we always start with self. And we need to develop and elevate that individual capability. Now, I've got the word creative there because we want to be working in the creative. We want to be creating that world. And often people find themselves in the reactive space a lot. So how do we get them to shift out there? So that's what that part is about. And these three areas are three key development areas. We start with self, then we start with developing others, and then we want to be ensuring that we are working in the creative. Uh, I could say once we've done that, but that's never done. That's an ongoing thing that occurs. However, when people are folks able to have the space to focus on others, and focus on spending more time in the creative, then we definitely need to be looking at what are the structures that is occurring or not occurring in a business around collaborating and connecting the leaders of that organization. Particularly when you start getting over 15 to 40, 50 employees, what is the structure? What are the meetings? What is the common language? KPIs, goals, vision, purpose, values. They're all common language that we should be using within an organization that connects and gets people to collaborate around that. But do we have the right roles? Do we have the right people? And what does that structure look like? The structure is going to be different based on the context of the organization. And often what I'm doing is helping um, leaders to be able to review their structure and to challenge them to get it to the right in the right format that they need for their business, which usually means more structure. So that's the second key part that I work with businesses on. And then the philosophy that I ultimately have overall is that businesses should be focusing on creating as many leaders. In fact, I believe everyone in the world should be a leader, at the very least leading themselves effectively. And necessarily understanding that how you can get yourself ready to turn up every day as consistently as possible will mean that we'll then be able to create a better world if that's the business or wherever you're leading in there. So the culture of creating more leaders, culture of future leaders, as I call it, and I focus a lot on ensuring that we're developing people a lot, um, and being conscious of that, understanding that there's a mindset of your organization, which is a combination of the mindset of all the individuals. There's a bunch of stories I can talk about where leaders of organizations suddenly realize that they've got many more fixed mindset. If you know Carol Dweck's work between fixed and growth mindset,
Mm,
I
mm,
think I know you do.
mm.
And they suddenly realized that they had more than 50% of their employees had much more of a fixed mindset. And
Mm,
they sat there in the room, this boardroom in front of me, and just looked at each other and kind of there was this aha of no wonder we can't, or sorry, it's so difficult to be able to get change in this organization because they've got all these people that necessarily are ultimately resistant to change.
mm.
And that came back all the way back to, some historical decisions, including, their recruitment process, which focused a lot on the dollars rather than necessarily on the values or necessarily the cultural fit originally. Um,
Interesting.
so that was a realization, and then take a while to change that, but at least they're aware of it, and then they're practically bringing in key leaders that have that different mindset to then influence through and then to shift that overall.
And
So
can they test for that? Is there a test to determine if someone is a fixed or growth mindset person?
look, yes, there is a test, though we can usually work it out with a few really good questions
Right.
and to understand ultimately whether people um, are open to growth and to
Right.
learning because you could even link it back to, is it a learning organization or an organization that likes to learn and test and
Mm,
learn and do things like that? If you can bring those things in, then you're going to be employing or bringing people that have a growth mindset into being. But ultimately, yes, you can test it. And we should be asking, in my opinion, questions for when you're hiring people that allow you to understand their mindset um,
mm.
around things. And
So what's an example of the types of questions that you ask that reveal a person's mindset?
whether you think that high performers are born or whether they can learn.
Uh,
What's the most recent thing that they've learnt? Um, you can ask them what books they read as well. What's their most previous um, uh, what do they do reflection? Do they do they so a lot of these questions can allow people to then understand
mm,
more about their mindset.
yeah, interesting.
So there is a but Carol Dweck's work, which is focused a lot on children and on ensuring that those kids that are necessarily prepared to try something and fail because they then realize they learn from that. So they're the questions, would you try this? Would you try that? And if people, depending on whether people are open to doing that, then allows them to understand more about
Mm,
their approach to that.
mm,
Because we can then get into reframing, of how necessarily you can change the way you think about something, which is probably a little more evolved around mindset, of being able to kind of see things from the positive or necessarily be allow yourself to kind of take the learnings out of things. It can come back to when you're prepared to fail to learn from that. Then that's a big shift in mindset rather than necessarily berating yourself or berating someone else for failing.
mm, mm. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that you can get so many fixed mindset people in one space, in one organization, so they cluster together.
Yes, well, so it comes back to at least this example, another client, they're in they grow things. So they kind of, you call them the farming or production space. And um, and they also have a particular um, culture. When I say culture, I'm talking about a country's culture, a singular country, not necessarily Australia, but based in Australia, that they've then recruited from within this um, network of their own, and they've then recruited very similar people. So there's a significant lack of diversity, and not just diversity of a race or from language or from culture, but also, and more significantly, high impact is that there's a lack of diversity in thinking, and definitely a lack of diversity in mindset because they're not. Sorry, they don't. There's not a sense to be able to question anyone in any level of authority. So we then have this monoculture and necessarily a space where just because someone says how high to jump, or sorry, when they say jump, they just ask how high rather than necessarily actually bringing critical thinking into the conversation, even though they probably know better or maybe in the pub later talk about how silly that manager was. there's no space or necessarily expectation to speak up about it.
Yeah. Right. Understood. Yeah.
Mm. So alignment, I haven't spoken about alignment, and that's probably one of the key things as well. So in for the original story, I spoke about their the alignment between those two businesses of the expectations of how to work or how to work with clients or how to deal with other people just wasn't there. There hadn't been any work done on that alignment. And so becoming clear on your values, your vision of where you're going, how fast you're going to get there, and the expectations of people, whether to be able to make decisions or everything's going to pass through the owner, etc. That alignment is something that needs to be had and had often and frequently. So we become deliberate with the culture that we're trying to create in that organization, which hopefully is around creating more leaders, but it could be whatever culture that you want to deliberately create. So that's the model I work with. Um, there's probably a fair bit in there, but did that did that
Yeah.
help you understand?
Yeah. It's wonderful to see it all laid out so clearly like that. And with that alignment piece, what's on average, you've been doing this for many years, what's on average how long it takes to change the culture of a company like that, get everyone aligned?
Ah, that's a great question. And really the answer is how long's a piece of string because it comes down a couple of elements here. So one is the risk appetite of the owners. And what I mean by that is how fast they're prepared to move or to make some significant decisions.
Mm.
You then have the other side, which is, well, what's the probably the financial performance of the organization and maybe some of that the capacity financially and time they may have to be able to make changes. Because if you rip out key people, we can create a significant upheaval in an organization. So we've got to get that balance right between, look, we need to make changes to shift the culture, um, but we also don't want to go so fast that necessarily we might, almost take the organization down. So getting that balance right will depend on the context of the organization and the appetite of the owner themselves, and also a bit of that the financial setup of the organization. So we take all those things into account, and then we'll move at the speed that the organization is prepared to move at. So it also depends on how misaligned the organization is as well. So it could be just a few bad eggs, if you will, or necessarily it could be like the organization I'm telling you about, which had the mindset, the lack of diversity in the mindset. That's going to take, I'd say, years. Probably, if they continue really working at it, they could probably do it in 2 to 3 years.
Mm.
But there are other organizations necessarily which maybe they just need to put in more structure, and they need to bring in a few key people with the right values. So bringing more adding in rather than taking away. Then you can be talking months. Probably 3 to 6 months, depending on
Mm. Right.
how the risk appetite again. If they
Mm.
prepare to move quickly, then that can happen quite quickly. So it's getting the right people in the right spaces, and the right structure to be able to then create the culture and empowering usually those new people, which have the aligned values and alignment in the vision, then to be able to influence and have the authority to make decisions and hold people to account to those new values, those new expectations.
Mm. Must be very rewarding when you take someone through that journey and they come out the other side, you know, aligned and profitable and,
There's
re-energized.
there's a client of mine that's another one that I haven't spoken about, but they're also in the construction wider construction industry, and and they had this wonderful network into some really significant large brands of big businesses. So therefore they had this huge ability to scale if they had the capacity. So therefore, his risk appetite, this owner, was a lot higher than necessarily others because he had the confidence that if he took out a few bad eggs, etc., that he can move quickly and to fill that, if you will. And so he made some really key decisions, and particularly back around the setting of his values. And after about 6 months of working with him, and if he hadn't doubled it, he'd more than doubled his ability. Now he had to go down, he had to go through pain first, which you often do, as he took out key people and elevated other people. But the key thing, there's a lot occurred, but the key thing he pointed to afterwards was becoming clear on his values
Right.
and
Always,
ensuring
it
that
seems to always come back to that, doesn't it?
it's often the foundational elements of understanding who we are. And if you're a
Yeah.
business owner, because we start with self, so I started with his own personal values. And then we kind of went, okay, well, if they're your personal values, what are the organization's values? Time between these. This is not, straight away. And ensuring that those values could be brought into by the other key individuals in the organization. And then they got on board, all right? And they're like, oh, well, this is how we turn up every day. This is how we look after our clients. And also, checked in that they're aligned with how those larger clients I was talking about, expected and wanted to work with them as well.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
and that, so he's now got them painted up um, the major stairway up into the space of his organization. And knows that's the biggest impact that he had, at least in that space. So, and also that he's now a much more um, a much more balanced um, leader. So he's leading creatively, to use that word on screen as well, in his family, in his other space in his life as well,
mm,
and he's got a more not only profitable but a business that feels more balanced for him as well in the way that he leads. Doesn't have to do all that other. He used to be doing payroll and stuff like that for the business, so he's kind of getting out of that, and he's now working at those levels and with the clients, in playing to his strengths. So,
mm.
yeah.
Amazing. And so, Charlie, how do people find you and work with you and talk to you further
Thank
about
you. I'll
this?
be talking a little bit. So I think the main thing I probably wanted to mention is that often business owners or key people don't know where the real problem is. They know there's something wrong. They know it's kind of not quite feeling, it's not quite working. So usually the best thing to do is to do the leadership system diagnostic, which can be found on a website, or can chat to me, directly, LinkedIn or email, whichever. But where you can do this diagnostic, which looks or uses the previous framework to then identify, where are those pain points. And from all my experience, then I provide recommendations that they can take and do themselves, or maybe there might be some work that I can maybe help them with possibly. But they also then get a one-on-one coaching hour as well on top of that diagnostic.
Wow.
And that's usually the best way because it's often not clear, or there could be multiple spaces that might need work,
Mm,
which is the one that need to be started on first. And
mm.
that's the question we try to answer. So that's usually the best way. I also run leadership trainings as well, if that's of interest to people. But of me, LinkedIn, email, or even phone, just Google my name. There's not too many Charlie Wins out there.
Okay, awesome. And your website is?
Orchardcoaching.com.
Okay.
And you can find it on .com.au as well. So either should get you there.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much,
No
Charlie, for
problem,
sharing
Sonia.
your
I
wisdom
appreciate
with
your
us.
time.
A pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.